Another capability of a binocular device is measuring stereo acuity, and again this uses gaze tracking. So in this example we're using 4 disc targets, very much like the standard clinical test. Only one of them has stereo disparity, and you display these targets to the patient and ask them to look at the target that appears to be in 3D. Now let's just say that's the bottom target. You then can you check all the 4 locations and determine where the patient's fovea is directed. If the patient's fovea is directed to any of the top 3 targets, or is moving around, darting from one back to the other one, you know that they have not detected correctly the target that's seen in 3D. But if they're fixed very nicely on the target that is the one with stereo disparity, they pass the test. You move on to the next pair with a decreased stereo disparity, and this way can automatically measure stereo acuity, hopefully in a very quantitative way. Foveal suppression should also be measurable in a similar way. This is a simple example of something that could be used like a Worth 4-dot test, where these chiral targets are presented, and if there's no foveal suppression, the patient should see 5 dots, and the instrument would instruct them to look at the middle dot, so they would be looking straight ahead at that middle dot. But for instance, if they had left foveal suppression, the dots would be shifted to the right, and when they were asked to look straight ahead at the middle dot, their gaze would be directed towards the right, and vice versa on the other side, it would be directed towards the left. So again, tracking where the fovea is pointing can be used as a functional input for results of these tests. Any instrument that can overcome the refractive error in the eye and measure the distance to the cornea and the position of the lens system should be able to perform autorefraction, at least for spherical equivalence. OCT can do that like many other instruments can. The example shown here is a display target shown to the patient. The autofocus lens system works to focus the retinal OCT, and the maximum focus of that retinal OCT is the point of maximum reduction of their refractive error. If you can measure the position of those lenses and measure the distance to the cornea, you should be able to predict the spherical equivalent refractive error, and using a point field technique also predict the astigmatic error and the axis very accurately. This may enable screening for refractive disease or residual refractive error in contact lens patients. Once a patient has been optimally refracted with their glasses off or their contacts in, these functional tests become very standardized. If the patient forgets to bring their glasses to the clinic that day, it doesn't matter because the machine can auto-refract them the same way every time. So for instance, you should be able to measure visual acuity with this instrument using standard Snellen targets and then voice recognition, but there are other ways of doing it as well. In this example, we're showing OKN targets, and you see the fovea moving in response to the OKN target below. And when the foveal movement is extinguished, it's assumed the patient can't see the OKN target, and this is more of an objective measure of visual acuity. But another important aspect of this is that the optical distance to the display target can be modified. The light can be collimated to make the target appear at infinity, or the light can be diverged at various vergences to simulate near. So you can measure vision at near, at distance, at 20 feet, either objectively or subjectively with things like Snellen or ETDRS charts. So just to take a step back for a minute, this instrument has the potential to be able to screen for causes of amblyopia because it can detect and measure strabismus. It can detect and measure anisometropia or isoametropia. It can detect visual occlusion. And if it can measure visual acuity with or without crowding bars, also measure stereopsis and foveal suppression, this is a pretty complete suite of tests that, again, can be self-administered in the field without any expert training to screen for amblyopia in children all around the world. So getting back to the functional tests that may be possible with this instrument, we may also be able to measure contrast sensitivity. Again, using the OKN target system, you simply modify the contrast of the targets until the foveal movement is extinguished, and that might be the level of contrast sensitivity for this patient. Photostress recovery time can similarly be measured, where you determine the patient's visual acuity level, you move up one line, and then by flashing something to the patient and waiting for recovery of the OKN response or recovery of their ability to read the Snellen or ETDRS targets, you can determine photostress recovery, which may help in differentiating macular and optic nerve disease. Color vision should be measurable with standard Ishihara color plates and voice recognition, or with gaze tracking. In this case, the fixation target is colored, and the machine can determine if the patient is gazing at the correct location. You could also use color-coded OKN targets, again looking for foveal movement, indicating intact color vision for that axis. Amsler grid testing is highly subjective, but may be something that this instrument could complete. By presenting one line at a time, both horizontal and vertical lines, and asking the patient to click the button when they see a distorted line, you may be able to map and triangulate in 2D areas of distortion and quantify them and follow them over time. Reading speed testing may be enhanced with this instrument because in addition to getting the actual time required to read text as well as the accuracy, this instrument may be able to track the fovea and be able to determine cadence as well as reading speed, accuracy, and time. So those are the functional tests that we think are possible with an instrument like this. But don't forget that this instrument is an OCT instrument. And performing OCT biomicroscopy means that this instrument should be able to get very good high-resolution three-dimensional corneal, anterior segment, anterior chamber, iris, angle, lens, vitreous, retina, choroid, optic nerve, OCTs. OCTs of the entire eye that can demonstrate pathology, hopefully in a way that is similar and in some cases maybe even superior to slit lamp examination. Many people in anterior segment research have demonstrated that anterior segment OCT may be equivalent or even superior in some cases to typical topography or pachymetry machines. With various scan protocols, you can capture the same data from anterior segment OCT. And in this way, patients with corneal edema could potentially monitor their corneal edema outside of the office and send those numbers to you. Patients with keratoconus or other corneal irregularities could measure their topography and send that information to you because it doesn't require an office visit, doesn't require an expensive technician or even an expensive piece of equipment. Gonioscopy may not be replaced with this instrument, but certainly many of the facets of gonioscopy can be accomplished with an anterior segment OCT that can measure angle geometry. And in the case of this instrument, we hope to build in Doppler OCT to detect neovascularization of the iris and the angle, which is something that current screening instruments cannot do, and is critical for patients with proliferative diabetic retinopathy or even with central vein occlusions. This instrument should also be able to accomplish exophthalmometry by detecting the corneal interfaces in both eyes simultaneously and making measurements of the distance to those corneal interfaces. You should have a very good measure of ocular protrusion, exophthalmos and ophthalmos, much in the same way an exophthalmometer would do it, but again, self-administered. Various aspects of the history may be completed by this instrument, certainly for a screening instrument to detect family history of glaucoma and ask certain simple questions. This can be done in many different ways. Like an iPhone, when you have an input device that includes a button, a microphone, and potentially even gaze tracking to select historical choices, you may be able to accomplish simple histories to help the machine screen.